Hello. I wonder if you can recognise who this is behind me. It's from a film, and if I tell you there were 5 children, a golden ticket, and a big chocolate factory involved, I think you probably guess which film I'm talking about. So behind me is one of the characters from the film called Augustus Gloop, and he was a very, very greedy young boy who, when he saw the chocolate, all he wanted to do was eat it, and he didn't listen to anybody's warning, including Willy Wonka's, and it didn't end well for him. So I'm just going to read you a short extract from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory about when Augustus Gloop goes up the pipe. And I'm probably going to stop at the bit where the Oompa Loompas come in, so that if you like the story, you can have a look for it and see if you can carry on and read it on from there. Okay. When Mr. Wonka turned round and saw what Augustus Gloop was doing, he cried out, "Oh no, please, Augustus, please, I beg of you not to do that. My chocolate must be untouched by human hands." "Augustus," called out Mrs. Gloop, "didn't you hear what the man said? Come away from that river at once." "Oh, this stuff is fabulous," said Augustus, taking not the slightest notice of his mother or Mr. Wonka. "Gosh, I need a bucket to drink it properly." "Augustus," cried Mr. Wonka, hopping up and down and waggling his stick in the air, "you must come away. You're dirtying my chocolate." "Augustus," cried Mrs. Gloop. "Augustus," cried Mr. Gloop. But Augustus was deaf to everything except the call of his enormous stomach. He was now lying full length on the ground, with his head far out over the river, lapping up the chocolate like a dog. "Augustus," shouted Mrs. Gloop, "you'll be giving that nasty cold of yours to about 1 million people all over the country." Yeah. "Be careful, Augustus," shouted Mr. Gloop. "You're leaning too far out." Mr. Gloop was absolutely right, for suddenly there was a shriek and then a splash, and into the river went Augustus, and in 1 second he disappeared under the brown surface. "Save him!" screamed Mrs. Gloop, going white in the face and waving her umbrella about. "He'll drown! He can't swim a yard! Save him! Save him!" "Good heavens, woman," said Mr. Gloop, "I'm not diving in there. I've got my best suit on." Augustus Gloop's face came up again to the surface, painted brown with chocolate. "Help! Help! Help!" he yelled. "Fish me out!" "Don't just stand there," Mrs. Gloop screamed at Mr. Gloop. "Do something." "I am doing something," said Mr. Gloop, who was now taking off his jacket and getting ready to dive into the chocolate. But while he was doing this, the wretched boy was being sucked closer and closer towards the mouth of one of the great pipes that was dangling down into the river. Then all at once, the powerful suction took hold of him completely, and he was pulled under the surface and then into the mouth of the pipe. The crowd on the riverbank waited breathlessly to see where he'd come out. "There he goes," somebody shouted, pointing upwards. And sure enough, because the pipe was made of glass, Augustus Gloop could be clearly seen shooting up inside it, head first like a torpedo. "Help! Murder! Police!" screamed Mrs. Gloop. "Augustus, come back at once! Where are you going?" "It's a wonder to me," said Mr. Gloop, "how that pipe is big enough for him to go through it." It isn't big enough," said Charlie Bucket. "Oh dear, look! He's slowing down." "Oh, so he is," said Grandpa Joe. "He's going to stick," said Charlie. "Oh, I think he is," said Grandpa Joe. "By golly, he has stuck," said Charlie. "It's his stomach that's done it," said Mr. Gloop. "He's blocked the whole pipe," said Grandpa Joe. "Oh, smash the pipe!" yelled Mrs. Gloop, still waving her umbrella around. "Augustus, come out of there at once!" The watchers below could see the chocolate swishing around the boy in the pipe, and they could see it building up behind him in a solid mass, pushing against the blockage. The pressure was terrific. Something had to give. Something did give, and that something was Augustus. Woof! Up he shot again like a bullet in the barrel of a gun. "He's disappeared, yelled Mrs. Gloop. Where does that pipe go? Quick, call the fire brigade. Keep calm, said Mr. Wonka. Keep calm, my dear lady, keep calm. There's no danger whatsoever. Augustus has gone on a little journey, that's all. A most interesting little journey, but he'll come out of it just fine, you'll see. How can he possibly come out just fine, snapped Mrs. Gloop. He'll be made into marshmallows in 5 seconds. Impossible, cried Mr. Wonka. Unthinkable, inconceivable, absurd. He could never be made into marshmallows. And why not, may I ask? Shouted Mrs. Gloop. Because that pipe doesn't go anywhere near it. That pipe, the one Augustus went up, happens to lead directly to the room where I make a most delicious kind of strawberry-flavoured chocolate-coated fudge. I'll be made into strawberry-flavoured chocolate-coated fudge, screamed Mrs. Gloop. My poor Augustus, they'll be selling him by the pound all over the country in the morning. Quite right, said Mr. Gloop. I know I'm right, said Mrs. Gloop. It's beyond a joke, said Mr. Gloop. Mr. Wonka doesn't seem to think so, cried Mrs. Gloop. Just look at him. He's laughing his head off. How dare you laugh like that when my boy's just gone up the pipe? You monster, she shrieked, pointing her umbrella at Mr. Wonka as though she were going to run him through. You think it's a joke, do you? You think that sucking my boy up into your fudge room like that is just one big colossal joke? He'll be perfectly safe, said Mr. Wonka, giggling slightly. He'll be chocolate fudge, shrieked Mrs. Gloop. Never, cried Mr. Wonka. Of course he will. I wouldn't allow it, cried Mr. Wonka. And why not? Shrieked Mrs. Gloop. Because the taste would be terrible, said Mr. Wonka. Just imagine it. Augustus-flavoured chocolate-coated Gloop. No one would buy that. They most certainly would, cried Mr. Gloop. Oh, I don't want to think about it, said Mrs. Gloop. No, do I, said Mr. Wonka. And I do promise you, madam, that your darling boy is perfectly safe. If he's perfectly safe, then where is he? Snapped Mrs. Gloop. Lead me to him this instant. Mr. Wonka turned around and clicked his fingers sharply. Click, click, click. 3 times. Immediately, an Oompa Loompa appeared, as if from nowhere, and stood beside him. The Oompa Loompa bowed and smiled, showing beautiful white teeth. His skin was rosy white, his long hair was golden brown, and the top of his head came just above the height of Mr. Wonka's knee. He wore the usual deerskin slung over his shoulder. Now, listen to me, said Mr. Wonka, looking down at the tiny man. I want you to take Mr. and Mrs. Gloop up to the fudge room and help them to find their son Augustus. He's just gone up the pipe. The Oompa Loompa took one look at Mrs. Gloop and exploded into peals of laughter. Oh, do be quiet, said Mr. Wonka. Control yourself. Pull yourself together. Mrs. Gloop doesn't think it's at all funny. You can say that again, said Mrs. Gloop. Go straight to the fudge room, said Mr. Wonka, and when you get there, take a long stick and start poking around inside the big chocolate mixing barrel. I'm almost certain you'll find him in there, but you better look sharp. You'll have to hurry. If you leave him in the chocolate mixing barrel too long, he's liable to get poured out into the fudge boiler, and that really would be a disaster, wouldn't it? My fudge would become quite uneatable. Mrs. Gloop let out a shriek of fury. I'm joking, said Mr. Wonka, giggling madly behind his beard. I didn't mean it. Forgive me. So sorry, so sorry. Goodbye, Mrs. Gloop. Goodbye, Mr. Gloop. See you later. As Mr. and Mrs. Gloop and their tiny escort hurried away, the 5 Oompa Loompas on the far side of the river suddenly began hopping and dancing about and beating wildly upon a number of very small drums. Augustus Gloop, they chanted. Augustus Gloop, Augustus Gloop, Augustus Gloop. Grandpa, cried Charlie. Listen to them, Grandpa. What are they doing? Shh, whispered Grandpa. I think they're going to sing us a song. And that's just what they did. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, see if you can get a hold of the book because it's a fabulous book. Okay, bye for now, everyone.